The year is 1995, and in a quiet, fog-draped town in rural Pennsylvania, a boy no older than 12 lies motionless in a hospital bed. His name is Caleb Winters, and just hours ago he was an ordinary child, riding his bike, laughing with friends, dreaming of baseball. But now his lips move in a slow, deliberate rhythm, chanting words no one in the room can understand. The sounds are guttural, ancient, laced with a cadence that feels older than the hills outside his window. Nurses exchange uneasy glances as Caleb's voice fills the sterile room with phrases that seem to claw their way out of history itself. "Ego sum lux in tenebris," he murmurs, his eyes glassy, fixed on a point no one else can see. The doctor, a seasoned psychiatrist, freezes. He recognizes fragments of the words, not English, not Spanish but Latin, a dead language, untouched by the modern world, spilling from the mouth of a boy who barely passed his 5th grade spelling test. What you're about to hear is no ordinary psychiatric case. It's a descent into a mystery that defies logic, a story that will grip your heart with equal parts dread and fascination. Caleb Winters wasn't just speaking Latin. He was reciting texts no living scholar had ever heard, texts that seemed to predate the Roman Empire itself. Was this a miracle, a delusion, or something far darker? A secret buried so deep in the human mind that its emergence could unravel everything we believe about sanity, history, and the boundaries of the soul. This is the story of a boy whose mind became a doorway to something ancient, something that should have stayed buried. It's a tale that will make you question how much of the human psyche we truly understand, and how much lies just beyond our grasp, waiting to break through. What could cause a child to channel a language lost to time? Was Caleb possessed by a force beyond comprehension? Or was his mind hiding a truth so disturbing it could shatter those who dared to uncover it? Stay with us until the end, because the answers will leave you staring into the abyss of your own thoughts, wondering if you're ever truly safe from the shadows within. This case reveals the fragility of the human mind, how it can fracture under pressures we cannot see, and how in its breaking it might reveal secrets no one was meant to know. It's a reminder that evil or something worse can hide in the most innocent of places, waiting for the right moment to speak. Caleb's story isn't just a medical anomaly. It's a warning that the mind is a labyrinth, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. If you're ready to dive into this dark tunnel with us, hit that like button to ensure more people uncover the chilling truth behind cases like Caleb's. In the comments, leave the phrase, "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story." By doing so, you're joining a community of truth seekers, those brave enough to face the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of the human psyche. Thank you for being here, for daring to look where others turn away. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The fog hung low over the small town of Black Hollow, Pennsylvania, on that fateful October evening in 1995, curling through the streets like ghostly fingers. Caleb Winters, a lanky 12-year-old with a mop of brown hair and a shy smile, had been playing in the woods near his family's modest home. The forest, known to locals as Whispering Pines, was a place of childhood adventures but also whispered legends, tales of strange lights, eerie chants, and a history no one could quite pin down. Caleb's mother, Ellen, thought nothing of his late afternoon bike rides. He always came home before dark, but that night, as the clock ticked past 7 p.m., an uneasy knot tightened in her chest. Caleb wasn't home. Ellen stood at the edge of the woods, her flashlight beam slicing through the mist, calling his name. Her voice echoed unanswered, swallowed by the dense pines. By 8 p.m., she'd rallied neighbors, and soon the town's volunteer fire department joined the search. Hours passed, the air growing colder, the fog thicker. Just after midnight, a firefighter stumbled upon Caleb, slumped against an ancient oak tree, his bike lying twisted beside him. His clothes were damp, his face pale as moonlight, and his eyes, wide and unblinking, stared into nothingness. "Caleb!" the firefighter shouted, but the boy didn't respond. Instead, his lips parted and a low guttural sound emerged, a string of syllables that made the firefighter's skin crawl. "Vox antiqua, in umbris." The words were unfamiliar, heavy with an unnatural weight, as if they carried centuries of dust. They rushed Caleb to Black Hollow General Hospital, a small facility ill-equipped for mysteries beyond broken bones or flu outbreaks. In the emergency room, Ellen clutched her son's hand, tears streaming down her face as nurses hooked him to monitors. His vitals were stable, but he remained unresponsive to questions, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Then, without warning, he sat upright, his voice clear and commanding, reciting phrases in a language no one could place. Ego sum lux in tenebris? Ego sum vox in silentio. The room fell silent, save for the beeping of the heart monitor. A nurse dropped her clipboard, and the attending doctor, Dr. Margaret Hensley, a psychiatrist on call, stepped closer, her brow furrowed. She'd seen catatonia, schizophrenia, even dissociative states, but nothing like this. Caleb, a boy who struggled with basic grammar, was speaking fluent Latin or something like it with the precision of a scholar. Dr. Hensley scribbled notes furiously, her mind racing. She'd studied Latin in college, enough to recognize it, but Caleb's words weren't just textbook phrases. They felt older, stranger, laced with an archaic dialect she couldn't fully grasp. She recorded his speech on a handheld cassette recorder, hoping to analyze it later. The phrases looped, hypnotic, as if Caleb were channeling a ritual. Umbre mi vocant. Sanguis clamat. The words sent a chill through the room, and Ellen, trembling, whispered, "That's not my son." But it was his voice, his face, his body, yet something else seemed to inhabit him, something that didn't belong in a small-town hospital in 1995. As the night wore on, Caleb's chanting grew softer, then stopped. He slumped back, eyes fluttering closed as if whatever force had seized him had retreated. Dr. Hensley exchanged a glance with the head nurse, both unspokenly agreeing to keep this quiet for now. They moved Caleb to the psychiatric ward for observation, a cramped wing with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. Ellen refused to leave his side, her hands clasped in prayer, though she wasn't a religious woman. She kept repeating, "He was fine yesterday. He was fine." But the truth was, something had changed in those woods, something that had awakened a voice inside Caleb, a voice that seemed to know things no one should. Dr. Hensley stayed late, poring over her notes and the recording. She called a colleague, Dr. Alan Roth, a linguist specializing in ancient languages, and played the tape over the phone. Roth's voice tightened as he listened. "That's not just Latin," he said. "It's older. Some of the phonetics, they resemble pre-Latin Italic dialects, maybe even Proto-Indo-European roots. No one speaks like that, Margaret. No one alive." The implications hung heavy between them. How could a boy with no formal education recite a language that predated recorded history? And why did his words carry a tone of warning, as if something was coming? By dawn, Caleb stirred, his eyes clearing slightly. He looked at his mother, confused, and whispered, "Mom, I saw them. The shadows in the trees." Ellen's heart sank. She wanted to believe it was a nightmare, a seizure, anything explainable. But the way Caleb's voice trembled, the way his eyes darted to the corners of the room, suggested he'd seen something no child should. Dr. Hensley, standing in the doorway, felt a growing dread. This wasn't just a psychiatric case, it was a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. A mystery that seemed to stretch beyond the boy in the bed, into the very fabric of the town itself. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy fog blanketing Black Hollow, casting an eerie glow over the psychiatric ward where Caleb Winters lay. His brief moment of lucidity had faded, replaced by a vacant stare that unnerved even the most seasoned nurses. Ellen Winters sat by his bedside, her eyes red from sleeplessness, clutching a worn photo of Caleb from his last birthday, blowing out candles with a grin. That boy seemed gone now, replaced by someone or something else. Dr. Margaret Hensley, the psychiatrist overseeing Caleb's case, had barely slept. Her mind tangled in the mystery of the boy's ancient words. The cassette tape of his chanting sat locked in her office drawer, its contents too unsettling to share with the hospital staff just yet. But the question gnawed at her. What had happened to Caleb in Whispering Pines? Caleb's whispered mention of shadows in the trees had sent Ellen into a quiet panic. She'd grown up hearing stories about those woods, tales of hikers vanishing, of strange carvings found on ancient trees, of voices carried on the wind that no one could trace. Black Hollow was a town built on such legends, dismissed by most as folklore to scare kids from wandering too far. But now, with her son lying in a hospital bed, speaking a language no one could explain, Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that the woods had claimed something from him. She pressed Dr. Hensley for answers, but the psychiatrist had none. Only questions that grew darker with each passing hour. By noon, Dr. Hensley decided to dig deeper into Caleb's experience in the woods. She sat across from him, her notepad ready, hoping to coax out more details. Caleb was awake but sluggish, his responses limited to nods or single words. "Caleb," she said softly, "can you tell me what happened last night? Before they found you?" His eyes flicked to her, then to the window where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. "I was riding," he mumbled. Then the air got heavy, like it was breathing. He paused, his small hands twisting the bedsheet. I saw them, shapes moving between the trees. They weren't people, they were wrong. Dr. Hensley's pen froze. She'd treated children with trauma before. But Caleb's words carried a weight beyond fear. A certainty. As if he'd witnessed something undeniable. What did they look like? She pressed gently. Caleb's lips trembled. Like shadows, but alive. They had eyes. Not real eyes, but holes. And they spoke to me. Not with words, but inside my head. He tapped his temple, his voice dropping to a whisper. They showed me things. Old things. Places with stone and fire. Ellen, listening from the corner, stifled a sob. Dr. Hensley kept her expression neutral, but her pulse quickened. Hallucinations, perhaps, or a dissociative episode. But the specificity of Caleb's descriptions, paired with his impossible language, hinted at something more. Desperate for context, Dr. Hensley contacted the Black Hollow Historical Society, a small archive run by an elderly curator named Esther Klein. Esther was a local institution, known for her obsessive knowledge of the town's past. Over the phone, Dr. Hensley described Caleb's condition without mentioning the ancient language, focusing instead on his talk of shadows and the woods. Esther's voice grew sharp. "Whispering Pines, you say? That place has always been trouble." She recounted fragments of the town's history, unexplained disappearances in the 1800s, a settler's journal describing dark forms that drove men mad, and rumors of a pre-Columbian burial ground buried deep in the forest. "No one's ever found it," Esther added, "but the old stories say the ground there is cursed." Something lingers. Dr. Hensley hung up, her skepticism warring with a growing unease. She decided to visit the woods herself, accompanied by a local deputy, Tom Carver, who'd been part of the search for Caleb. The forest was silent as they approached the spot where Caleb was found, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. The oak tree stood out, its gnarled roots twisting into the ground like claws. Tom pointed to Caleb's bike, still lying nearby, its frame bent as if struck by force. "No way he did that himself," Tom muttered, scanning the trees. Dr. Hensley noticed something else, faint markings on the oak's trunk, barely visible under moss. They weren't random scratches, but deliberate angular symbols that looked like no alphabet she knew. She snapped photos, her hands unsteady. Back at the hospital, Caleb's condition worsened. He began muttering again, the same archaic phrases but now with a feverish intensity. "Sangus clamat. Umbri surgent." Ellen, frantic, demanded tests, MRIs, EEGs, anything to explain her son's state. The results showed nothing. No brain trauma, no seizures, no chemical imbalances. Yet Caleb's episodes grew more frequent, his words interspersed with cries of, "They're coming." Dr. Hensley sent the photos of the tree carvings to Dr. Alan Roth, the linguist, along with a new recording of Caleb's chants. Roth called back within hours, his voice tense. "Those symbols, they're not random. They resemble pre-Sumerian glyphs, Margaret. And Caleb's speech, it's shifting. It's not just Latin anymore. There are traces of something older, something no one's spoken in millennia." As night fell, the hospital lights flickered, a common occurrence in Black Hollow's aging infrastructure. But it felt ominous now. Caleb's eyes snapped open, and he grabbed Ellen's arm with a strength that didn't belong to a 12-year-old. "They're here," he whispered, his voice layered as if two voices spoke at once. The room grew cold, the air heavy, and Dr. Hensley, standing in the doorway, felt a chill that wasn't just fear. Something was watching, not from the room, but from within Caleb himself. The chill in Caleb Winter's hospital room lingered long after his grip on Ellen's arm loosened, leaving bruises that would bloom purple by morning. Dr. Margaret Hensley stood frozen in the doorway, her rational mind grappling with the impossible. The boy's voice had echoed with an otherworldly timbre, as if the words weren't his own. Ellen pulled away, rubbing her arm, her face a mask of terror and exhaustion. "What's happening to my boy?" she pleaded, her voice cracking. Dr. Hensley had no answer, only a gnawing certainty that this case had veered far beyond standard psychiatry. She excused herself, stepping into the dimly lit hallway, where the fluorescent bulbs buzzed like distant insects, and pulled out her phone to call Dr. Alan Roth again. "Alan, you need to come here, now." Dr. Roth arrived the next afternoon, his arrival heralded by the rumble of his old Volvo pulling into the hospital lot. A tall man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a rumpled tweed jacket, Roth was a professor of linguistics at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in dead and endangered languages. He'd spent his career deciphering forgotten scripts from dusty archives. But nothing had prepared him for a living, breathing enigma like Caleb. Dr. Hensley met him in the lobby, her face drawn from another sleepless night. "The episodes are escalating," she said as they walked to the ward. "He's not just reciting, he's conversing as if responding to unheard questions." Roth nodded, his satchel heavy with notebooks and a portable recorder. "I've listened to the tapes you sent. It's extraordinary. The phonetics suggest a proto-language, perhaps akin to Etruscan or even older Indo-European branches. But the fluency, it's impossible for a child." They entered Caleb's room to find him sitting up, staring at the wall with an unnatural calm. Ellen hovered nearby, her eyes darting between her son and the newcomers. Caleb's gaze shifted to Roth, and for a moment his expression flickered with recognition. Or was it something else? "Alan," Hensley introduced, "this is Caleb Winters." Roth smiled gently, pulling up a chair. "Hello, Caleb. I'm here to help figure out what's going on." Caleb's lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes remained distant. Then, without prompt, he spoke. "Lingua umbrarum, veritas in profundis." Roth's breath caught. He recognized the structure. Archaic, layered with inflections lost to time. "That's not Latin," he murmured to Hensley. "It's older. Pre-Italic, maybe." He switched on his recorder and leaned forward. "Caleb, can you tell me what that means?" The boy's response came in a flood, words tumbling out in a rhythmic cadence that filled the room with an ancient resonance. "Ego sum custos antiquorum. Silve vocant me, sanguis ligat nos." Roth scribbled furiously, his face paling. The language wasn't just spoken. It was performed with intonations that evoked rituals long forgotten. Ellen backed away, pressing against the wall. "Make it stop," she whispered. But Roth was transfixed. After several minutes, Caleb fell silent, slumping back as if drained. Roth turned to Hensley. "This isn't glossolalia or fabricated speech. The grammar is consistent, the vocabulary rich. It's a real language, or was. And the content, it speaks of guardians, ancient woods, bound by blood. It ties back to those carvings you photographed." That evening, in Hensley's office, Roth spread out his notes alongside printouts of the tree symbols. "Look here," he said, pointing to a glyph resembling a twisted spiral. "This matches a motif in ancient European petroglyphs from sites dating back to 2000 BCE. And Caleb's words reference shadow woods, umbrarum sylvae. Black Hollow's forest might sit on something old, something sacred or cursed." Hensley rubbed her temples. "But how does a boy know this? Trauma, hypnosis?" Roth shook his head. "Perhaps it's cryptomnesia, buried knowledge surfacing, or something parapsychological." He hesitated, knowing how it sounded. "There are documented cases of xenoglossy, where individuals speak unknown languages, like the Watsaka Wonder in the 1870s, or more recently, cases in Europe where children channel extinct dialects." As they delved deeper, Roth played back the recordings, translating fragments. "He's describing a ritual," Roth explained. "Something about awakening guardians from the earth. And he mentions a key, a boy who bridges worlds." Hensley's skepticism cracked. She recalled Caleb's whisper about shadows in the trees, the way the air had thickened in the woods. What if it's not just in his mind? What if something happened out there? Roth nodded gravely. "We need to go back to the site. There might be more carvings, artifacts even." The next day, they returned to Whispering Pines, this time with Deputy Carver and a local historian, Esther Klein. The fog had lifted slightly, but the woods felt oppressive, branches creaking like old bones. At the oak tree, Roth examined the markings closely, tracing them with his fingers. "These aren't vandalism," he confirmed. "They're weathered, perhaps centuries old." Esther, peering over his shoulder, gasped. "I've seen similar in Old Town records. Back in the 1700s, settlers reported Indian curses in these woods, strange languages heard at night, people vanishing." She pulled out a yellowed map from her bag. Legend says there's a burial mound nearby, pre-colonial. No one's found it, but their search led them deeper, the path narrowing until they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a cluster of stones arranged in a spiral pattern, half buried in moss. Roth knelt, brushing away dirt to reveal more glyphs. "This is it," he breathed. A sight of power. As he spoke, a wind stirred, rustling leaves in a whisper that almost sounded like words. Deputy Carver shifted uneasily. "We should leave." But Roth was absorbed, sketching the stones. Back at the hospital, Caleb's condition had stabilized, but his eyes held a new depth, as if he'd aged years in days. Ellen sat with him, reading from a children's book, but he interrupted her. "They chose me, Mom, in the woods." His voice was his own, but the words carried an echo. Dr. Hensley, returning with Roth, overheard and felt a surge of dread. The linguist's face was grim. "Margaret, whatever this is, it's not just psychiatric. Caleb's language, it's not dead. It's alive and it's speaking through him." As night descended, the hospital grew quiet, but in Caleb's room the air hummed with unspoken tension. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, murmuring softly. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, listening. The shadows in the hospital room seemed to pulse with a life of their own as Caleb Winters murmured into the night. His words a bridge between the modern world and something far older, far more primal. Dr. Alan Roth, the linguist, sat by the bedside, his recorder capturing every syllable, while Dr. Margaret Hensley paced the floor, her mind a whirlwind of scientific doubt and creeping superstition. Ellen Winters had finally dozed off in a chair. Her body slumped from exhaustion, but even in sleep, her face twitched with worry. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. The hospital corridors empty save for the occasional squeak of a nurse's shoe. But in Caleb's room, the air grew thicker, charged with an invisible energy that made the hairs on Roth's arms stand up. "He's building to something," Roth whispered to Hensley. "The language, it's evolving, incorporating more elements. Listen." Caleb's voice rose slightly, the phrases flowing like a chant. "Custodes surgent, sanguis evocat, porta aperitur." Roth translated under his breath. "The guardians rise. Blood calls. The gate opens." Hensley stopped pacing, her eyes wide. "What gate? What guardians?" Roth shook his head. In ancient lore, guardians were entities that protected sacred sites, burial grounds, portals to other realms. The stones we found in the clearing, they matched descriptions from old European myths, but here, in America, it doesn't make sense. But sense was in short supply in Black Hollow these days. The town, nestled in its valley, had always been a place where history lingered like mist, with Native American legends blending with settler tales of strange happenings. Now it seemed those legends were stirring, awakened by a boy's innocent wander into the woods. As the chanting intensified, Caleb's body tensed, his eyes rolling back to show only whites. Ellen jolted awake, her hand flying to her mouth. "Caleb!" she cried, but he didn't hear her. Instead, his hands clenched the sheets and the room's temperature dropped sharply, breath visible in puffs. The monitors beeped erratically, then stabilized as if whatever force gripped him was careful not to trip alarms. Roth leaned closer, fascinated despite the fear gnawing at him. "Caleb, who are the guardians?" he asked in English, then repeated it in halting Latin. The boy's head snapped toward him, eyes focusing with an unnatural sharpness. "Nos sumus umbrae antiquae, protectores terrae, puer clavis." The voice was layered, deeper than a child's, echoing as if from a cavern. "We are the ancient shadows, protectors of the land. The boy is the key." Hensley grabbed Roth's arm. "This isn't possible. It has to be a dissociative identity or some neurological event." But even as she spoke, the shadows in the room elongated, stretching across the walls like fingers. A low hum filled the air, vibrating in their chests. Ellen backed away, pressing against the door. "Get it out of him!" she screamed. Roth, undeterred, pressed on. "Why, Caleb?" "What do you want?" The response came swift. "Sanguis violatus. Ritus interruptus. Restitui debimus, blood violated. Ritual interrupted. We must be restored." The words hung in the air, and suddenly Caleb convulsed, his body arching off the bed. The episode lasted only seconds, but when it ended he collapsed, sweating, his breathing ragged. The room warmed, The shadows retreated and the hum faded. In the aftermath, the team huddled in Hensley's office, the cassette player replaying the exchange. Roth's hands trembled as he took notes. This isn't just language recall. It's interactive. Whatever's speaking through him is responding intelligently. Hensley nodded slowly. We need more help. A neurologist, maybe a parapsychologist. Ellen, wrapped in a blanket, stared blankly. He's my son, not a vessel. But the evidence was mounting. The next day they consulted Dr. Elena Vargas, a neurologist from Philadelphia, who arrived with advanced equipment. She ran scans while Caleb was awake, then induced a mild sedative to observe his brain activity. The results were baffling. Heightened activity in language centers, but patterns that didn't match any known disorder. It's like his brain is wired for a language he never learned, Vargas said. And during the episodes, there's surge in the amygdala, fear center, and the temporal lobe, associated with religious experiences or hallucinations. Meanwhile, back in the woods, Deputy Carver and Esther Klein returned to the clearing, armed with shovels and flashlights. The spiral stones beckoned, their glyphs glowing faintly under moonlight. We shouldn't dig, Carver muttered, but Esther insisted. If there's a connection to Caleb, we have to know. They unearthed artifacts, bone fragments etched with similar symbols, and a small obsidian blade stained dark. Carbon dating later would place them at over 2,000 years old, predating known settlements. Esther's research uncovered parallels to ancient Celtic rituals brought by early immigrants, blended with indigenous practices, blood offerings to guardian spirits to protect the land from invaders. As news of Caleb's condition leaked, the town buzzed with rumors. Some called it possession, others a hoax. A local priest visited, sprinkling holy water, but Caleb's chants only grew louder in response. Roth, delving into Godfrey's American Monsters, found accounts of similar phenomena. Children in rural areas channeling voices after encountering shadow beings in forests, often linked to ancient sites disturbed by development. Black Hollow's woods had seen logging in the 1980s, perhaps disrupting something buried. That night, Caleb's episodes peaked. He sat up, eyes glowing faintly, and described visions. Tall, shadowy figures with hollow eyes, guardians awakened by his blood, a cut from his bike crash. They need restoration, he said in English, then switched to the ancient tongue. The team watched in horror as objects in the room levitated slightly, then fell. Vargas called it psychokinesis, but Roth knew better. The guardians were manifesting, using Caleb as conduit. By dawn, a plan formed. Return to the clearing for a symbolic ritual to restore the site. It was desperate, blending science and myth, but with Caleb's health deteriorating, they had no choice. As they prepared, the fog rolled in thicker, the woods whispering secrets only Caleb could understand. The fog in Black Hollow thickened as if the town itself were holding its breath, wrapping the hospital and the surrounding woods in a shroud that muffled sounds and distorted shapes. Dr. Margaret Hensley stood at the window of her office, staring out into the gray expanse, her reflection ghostly against the glass. The plan they had hatched in the early hours felt like madness now. A symbolic ritual to appease whatever ancient force had latched onto Caleb Winters. It was a blend of Roth's linguistic insights, Esther Klein's historical knowledge, and a dash of desperation born from watching a child slip further into the abyss. Ellen Winters had reluctantly agreed, her faith in medicine shattered, clinging to any thread that might save her son. If it brings him back, she'd said, her voice hollow, I'll do anything. Deputy Tom Carver, ever the pragmatist, had grumbled about hocus pocus, but even he couldn't deny the unnatural chill that had settled over the town since Caleb's incident. Preparations began at dawn, the group gathering supplies that echoed the artifacts unearthed in the clearing. Salt for purification, herbs from Esther's garden that mimicked ancient offerings, and the obsidian blade carefully wrapped in cloth. Roth had pieced together a rough script from Caleb's chants and the glyphs on the stones, a recitation meant to restore the guardians, to seal whatever gate had cracked open. It's not exorcism, Roth explained as they loaded into Carver's truck. It's acknowledgement. These entities, if that's what they are, seek balance. The logging in the 80s disturbed their rest. Caleb's blood, his accidental offering, woke them. Hensley nodded, though her scientific mind rebelled. She carried a medical kit, ready for any physical fallout, but deep down, she feared the psychological toll this could take on Caleb. who was being wheeled out in a hospital gown, his eyes distant but alert. The drive to Whispering Pines was silent, the road winding through mist-shrouded trees that seemed to lean in, branches scraping the vehicle like skeletal fingers. Caleb sat between Ellen and Hensley in the back, his small hand cold in his mother's grasp. Occasionally he muttered phrases restitutio, pax umbrit, restoration, peace to the shadows. Roth, in the front with Esther and Carver, consulted his notes, practicing the incantation. We form a circle around the stones, he instructed. Caleb at the center. We recite together, offer a symbolic blood drop, mine, not his, and bury the blade as a seal. Esther added historical context, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. Similar rites were performed by early settlers blending Celtic and indigenous traditions. Blood binds, but it also releases. Arriving at the edge of the woods, the group disembarked, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Carver led the way with a flashlight, though the morning light filtered weakly through the canopy. The path to the clearing felt longer than before, the trees whispering in a breeze that carried faint echoes. Words? Or imagination? Caleb walked unaided now, his step sure as if drawn by an invisible thread. They're waiting, he said softly, his voice his own, yet laced with that ancient timbre. Ellen squeezed his hand tighter, her heart pounding. Hensley monitored his vitals with a portable device. Everything normal, yet nothing felt right. The clearing emerged like a hidden sanctuary, the spiral stones stark against the mossy ground. The glyphs seemed more pronounced now, as if etched deeper by unseen hands. The group arranged themselves, Roth opposite Hensley, Esther and Carver at the sides, Ellen beside her son in the center. Caleb stood calmly, his gaze fixed on the largest stone where the obsidian blade had been found. Begin, Roth said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. They started the chant drawn from Caleb's words, Custodes antiqui audite vocem nostrum, sanguis datur pax reditur, porta clauditur. Guardians of old, hear our voice. Blood is given, peace is returned. The gate is closed. As the words filled the air, a subtle shift occurred. The fog swirled around the clearing, forming eddies that danced like spirits. Caleb's eyes widened and he joined in, his voice amplifying the others, layering harmonies that resonated through the trees. Ellen felt a warmth in her chest, a mix of hope and terror. Then the ground trembled faintly, a low rumble like distant thunder. Shadows detached from the trees, coalescing into vague forms. Tall, ethereal figures with hollow eyes, just as Caleb had described. They hovered at the clearing's edge, watching, their presence a pressure on the mind evoking primal fear. Roth pricked his finger with the blade, letting a drop fall onto the central stone. Restitutio completa, he intoned. Completion of restoration. The shadows stirred, drawing closer, their forms flickering like smoke. Caleb stepped forward, unbidden, raising his arms. They accept, he whispered. But then his body convulsed, the ancient voice booming from him. Non satis. Plus sanguis requiritur. Not enough. More blood is required. Panic surged. Hensley rushed to Caleb, injecting a sedative, but he shrugged it off with unnatural strength. The shadows advanced, the air growing icy, the chant dissolving into chaos. Ellen screamed as one shadow reached for her son, its touch like frost on his skin. Carver drew his gun, firing into the air, the shots echoing harmlessly. Esther shouted counter-phrases from her notes, ancient wards against spirits. Roth, thinking quickly, grabbed the blade and made a shallow cut on his palm, letting blood flow freely onto the stone. Accipite hoc, pacem accipite. Accept this. Accept peace. The shadows paused, swirling around Caleb, who collapsed to his knees, chanting furiously. The ground shook again, cracks forming in the earth, revealing glimpses of buried bones, remnants of long-forgotten rituals. In that moment of crisis, Hensley pieced it together. The Guardians weren't malevolent but protective, disturbed by modern encroachments. Caleb's innocence had made him the perfect vessel, but the ritual needed sincerity, not symbolism. She joined the chant anew, her voice firm, urging the others. Slowly the shadows receded, coiling back into the trees, the rumble fading. Caleb went limp, Ellen catching him as he fell. The fog lifted slightly, sunlight piercing through for the first time in days. Back at the hospital, Caleb slept deeply, his face peaceful for the first time since the incident. Tests showed normalized brain activity, no more surges. Roth bandaged his hand, pondering the implications. "We touched something real," he said to Hensley. "A collective memory, perhaps, or actual entities." Esther documented everything. Her historian's heart thrilled. But for Ellen, it was enough that her son stirred, whispering, "Mom." It worked. Yet, as night fell, faint whispers echoed in the woods, suggesting the guardians watch still, their peace tentative. The days following the ritual in the clearing brought a fragile calm to Black Hollow. Like the eye of a storm where the winds still howl at the edges, Caleb Winters awoke in his hospital bed with the sun streaming through the window, his eyes clear and childlike once more, free from the shadowy depths that had haunted them. Ellen Winters wept tears of relief as he hugged her, his small arms wrapping around her neck with a warmth she feared she'd lost forever. "I feel better, Mom," he said, his voice purely his own, no echo of ancient tongues lingering in its timbre. Dr. Margaret Hensley checked his vitals obsessively, noting the steady heartbeat, the normal brain scans, the absence of any anomalous activity. "It worked," she murmured to Dr. Alan Roth over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, the linguist's bandaged hand a stark reminder of the blood offered to appease the unseen. Roth nodded, but his eyes held a shadow of doubt. "For now," he replied, "these things, they don't vanish overnight. The whispers might fade, but the woods remember." The town, unaware of the full extent of the events, buzzed with subdued gossip. The fog had lifted, revealing crisp autumn skies, and life resumed its rhythm. Children back to school, farmers tending fields, the local diner serving pancakes with the same greasy efficiency. But subtle changes rippled through Black Hollow. Deputy Tom Carver reported odd occurrences: animals behaving strangely, cows refusing to enter certain pastures, birds flocking in unnatural patterns over whispering pines. Esther Klein, poring over her archives, uncovered a forgotten journal from 1805, penned by a settler named Elijah Black, the town's founder. In faded ink, Black described a similar incident. A young girl found wandering the woods speaking in tongues of the old world, claiming shadows had chosen her to restore a desecrated burial site. The entry ended abruptly, noting the girl's sudden recovery after a blood rite, but warned of lingering voices that plagued the town for years after. Esther shared this with Roth, who felt a chill. 1805? That's when European settlers clashed with indigenous tribes here. Perhaps a massacre disturbed the guardians. The connection to Caleb's case was uncanny, as if history was looping, the ancient language a thread binding past and present. Caleb was discharged after a week of observation, returning home to his modest house on the edge of the woods. Ellen fussed over him, cooking his favorite meals, macaroni and cheese, apple pie, trying to rebuild normalcy. But at night, when the house creaked and the wind sighed through the pines, Caleb would sit up in bed listening. "Do you hear them, Mom?" he'd ask, his voice a whisper. Ellen would shake her head, attributing it to residual trauma, but she too felt watched, as if eyes peered from the darkness beyond the windows. Dr. Hensley scheduled follow-up sessions, where Caleb drew pictures, swirling shadows, stone spirals, and a boy himself standing as a bridge between worlds. "They didn't leave," he confided during one session. "They're quiet now, but they whisper secrets." Roth attended these, transcribing any stray phrases that slipped into Caleb's speech. Most were English, but occasionally a word or two in that proto-language emerged. Susuri, memoriae, whispers, memories. As weeks passed, the lingering effects spread subtly. Neighbors reported dreams of ancient forests, where tall figures with hollow eyes spoke of broken pacts. One farmer, old Mr. Harlan, claimed to have found fresh carvings on his barn door, glyphs matching those in the clearing. He spoke of hearing chants at dusk, drawing him toward the woods. Carver investigated, finding no evidence of vandalism, but the carvings were there, etched deep. Esther dove deeper into history, linking the 1805 incident to a specific event, a raid on a native village, where settlers desecrated a sacred mound, spilling blood that awoke the old ones. The girl in the journal had been the daughter of a settler, stumbling upon the site much like Caleb. Her recovery was short-lived. Later entries from Black's descendants mentioned her descending into madness, speaking prophecies that foretold town misfortunes, fires, floods, disappearances. Roth and Hensley debated the implications. "It's psychosomatic contagion," Hensley argued, clinging to science. the town's folklore amplifying Caleb's case. But Roth pointed to the artifacts, the interactive chants, the physical manifestations during the ritual. We touched something collective, perhaps a Jungian archetype manifest, or literal spirits tied to the land. They decided to monitor Caleb closely, but the boy seemed to thrive, returning to school where friends teased him about his adventure. Yet, teachers noted his newfound interest in history, sketching maps of ancient sites during class. One drawing depicted a mound dated 1805 with shadows rising from it, details no 12-year-old should know. Then, the whispers escalated. One moonless night, Ellen awoke to find Caleb standing at the window murmuring, "Tempus reddit, sanguis repetit." Time returns, blood repeats. She shook him gently, but his eyes were glazed, reflecting stars that seemed too bright. The next morning, Caleb remembered nothing, but Ellen called Hensley in a panic. The psychiatrist arrived with Roth, and together they questioned him. Under hypnosis, a risky move but necessary, Caleb's voice shifted, recounting events from 1805, the raid, the screams, the blood soaking the earth. "The Guardian slept until disturbed," he said in that layered tone. "They chose the girl to warn, but she failed. Now the cycle repeats. The boy must complete the restoration." Hensley ended the session abruptly, her hands shaking. "What does that mean?" Ellen demanded. Roth's face was grave. "The ritual wasn't enough. There's more to restore, perhaps atonement for the past." The town began to fracture under the weight of the unseen. More residents reported auditory hallucinations, whispers in the wind calling names from history. Carver found an old well in the woods uncovered by recent rains containing bones dated to the 1800s. Esther confirmed, "Victims of the 1805 clash, improperly buried." "That's the desecration," she said. "They need proper rites." The group reconvened, planning a second ritual, this time to rebury the remains with honors blending indigenous and settler traditions. Caleb, hearing of it, insisted on participating. "I have to," he said. "They chose me." As preparations unfolded, the whispers grew louder, infiltrating dreams town-wide. Hensley herself dreamt of shadows urging her to remember, waking with glyphs faintly marked on her skin, fading like bruises. Roth translated more of Caleb's subconscious utterances, revealing prophecies, a coming storm if the cycle broke. The air in Black Hollow hummed with anticipation, the woods alive with unseen eyes. Caleb, the unwitting key, stood at the center, his innocence a beacon or a target for forces that refused to rest. The whispers in Black Hollow had evolved from faint murmurs to a persistent chorus, infiltrating the daily lives of its residents like an insidious fog that no amount of sunlight could dispel. Caleb Winters, now the unwitting epicenter of the town's unraveling mystery, spent his days in a haze of normalcy, punctuated by moments of eerie clarity. At school, he excelled in history lessons, reciting details about ancient civilizations with an accuracy that unnerved his teachers, as if the knowledge had been etched into his mind by invisible hands. Ellen Winters watched him closely, her maternal instincts sharpened by fear, noting how he would pause mid-sentence during dinner, cocking his head as if listening to a distant conversation. "They're getting louder," he'd say casually, as if discussing the weather before resuming his meal. Dr. Margaret Hensley, in her therapy sessions, probed gently, but Caleb's responses grew cryptic. "The cycle needs closing, or it starts again." Roth, the linguist, transcribed these utterances, finding patterns that mirrored the 1805 journal, prophecies of repetition, blood debts unpaid. The discovery of the old well and its grim contents had galvanized the group into action. The bones, brittle and weathered, were carefully extracted by Carver and a team of volunteers laid out in Esther's Historical Society basement for identification. Forensic analysis, rushed through connections at the state lab, confirmed they were a mix of indigenous and settler remains from the early 19th century, bearing marks of violence, arrow wounds, musket balls embedded in femurs. "This is the massacre site," Esther declared, her voice echoing in the dimly lit room filled with dusty artifacts. Elijah Black's raid in 1805, settlers ambushed a native encampment over land disputes, desecrating their sacred mound. The Guardians, as Caleb calls them, were invoked in retaliation, but the cycle was interrupted when the bodies were dumped unceremoniously. Roth nodded, piecing together the linguistic threads. Caleb's language references sanguis repetit, blood repeats. The unrest stems from improper burial, a broken rite that echoes every generation or so. Planning the second ritual consumed them. Unlike the first's hasty symbolism, this one demanded authenticity. Esther consulted tribal elders from a nearby reservation, descendants of the affected peoples who agreed to participate after hearing Caleb's story. "The land remembers," one elder named Running Deer said gravely over a video call. "If the boy speaks the old tongue, he has chosen to mend the tear." They outlined a ceremony blending traditions, smudging with sage, chants in both the ancient language Roth had decoded and native dialects, and a proper reburial at the mound's presumed location near the clearing. Caleb was to lead the invocation, his role as the key now undeniable. Ellen resisted at first, her protective instincts flaring. "He's just a child," she protested in Hensley's office, tears streaming. But Caleb, overhearing, placed a hand on her arm. "I have to, Mom. They won't stop until it's done." His eyes held a wisdom far beyond his years, a glimpse of the shadows within. As the ritual date approached, a full moon in late November, the town's anomalies intensified. Streetlights flickered in patterns that mimicked Morse code, decoded by a curious resident to spell fragments of Latin: Restitu, Pax, Restore, Peace. Animals gathered at the wood's edge, deer and foxes standing sentinel, their eyes reflecting unnatural light. Residents reported visions, ghostly figures in period clothing wandering streets at dusk, vanishing when approached. Carver, patrolling, encountered one such apparition, a spectral girl, perhaps the 1805 victim, mouthing silent words that chilled him. He confided in the group, his skepticism crumbling. "This ain't natural. We gotta end it." Hensley, documenting everything, noticed physiological changes in Caleb. His pulse synced with lunar phases, his sleep talk filled with historical reenactments of the 1805 events, as if he were reliving them. The night of the ritual arrived under a blood moon, casting the woods in crimson hues that amplified the eerie atmosphere. The group assembled at the clearing, now expanded to include the tribal elders, 5 in total, adorned in traditional regalia, carrying drums and bundles of sacred herbs. The bones, wrapped in deerskin, lay on a makeshift altar of stones. Torches flickered, their flames dancing as if alive. Caleb stood at the center, barefoot on the cold earth, his hospital pallor replaced by a resolute glow. Ellen held his hand until the last moment, then stepped back into the circle formed by the participants: Hensley, Roth, Carver, Esther, and the elders. Running Deer began with a smudge, wafting smoke over everyone, purifying the space. "We honor the ancestors," he intoned in his native language, translated by an aide. Roth handed Caleb a scroll with the decoded invocation, but the boy shook his head. "I know the words." As the drums started a rhythmic beat echoing like heartbeats, Caleb raised his voice. "Custodes, audit, sanguis reditum est, animae requiescant, guardians here. Blood is returned, souls rest." The ancient language flowed from him, amplified, resonating through the trees. The elders joined in harmony, their chants weaving with his, creating a tapestry of sound that vibrated the ground. Shadows stirred, emerging from the pines, not aggressive this time but solemn, forming a larger circle around the group. Their hollow eyes watched, forms shifting between native warriors and settler ghosts, a visual testament to the mingled blood. As the ceremony peaked, Caleb approached the altar, sprinkling earth mixed with symbolic blood, donated by volunteers, including drops from each participant over the bones. Circulus clauditer, pax eterna, the cycle closes, eternal peace. A wind howled, whipping leaves into a vortex, and the ground trembled as if accepting the offering. The shadows converged, enveloping the bones in a misty embrace, then dissipated, carrying ethereal sighs of relief. Caleb staggered, supported by Ellen, his face drained but serene. The drums faded, and silence descended, broken only by the hoot of an owl, a sign, Running Deer said, of approval from the spirits. In the ritual's wake, Black Hollow transformed. The whispers ceased, replaced by a profound quiet that felt healing. Caleb slept soundly for the first time, dreaming of ordinary things. Baseball, friends. Tests showed no lingering anomalies. His brain activity normalized completely. The town, though scarred by the events, found unity. Memorials erected for the 1805 victims, blending histories in a new narrative. Roth published a paper anonymizing the case, linking it to xenoglossy phenomena in American monsters lore. Hensley reflected in her journal, "We mended more than a boy. We healed a wound in time." Yet, on quiet nights, Caleb would smile at the woods, knowing the guardians slept but ever watchful, their cycle reckoned but not forgotten. Months slipped by in Black Hollow like leaves falling from the pines, each one carrying away a fragment of the terror that had gripped the town during those fateful autumn days of 1995. Caleb Winters, once the vessel for voices from a forgotten era, had returned to the rhythms of childhood with a resilience that astonished those who knew his story. He rode his bike again, though never venturing too deep into whispering pines, and his laughter echoed through the streets as he played catch with neighborhood kids. Ellen Winters watched him from the porch, her heart a mix of gratitude and lingering vigilance. The bruises from his grip during the episodes long faded but etched in her memory. She had taken up gardening, planting rows of lavender and sage around their home. Herbs said to ward off unrest, a quiet nod to the rituals that had restored her son. Dr. Margaret Hensley continued her follow-ups, her notes evolving from clinical observations to something more philosophical, pondering the thin veil between mind and myth. The reburial ceremony had marked a turning point, the bones laid to rest with honors that bridged centuries of pain. The tribal elders had returned to their reservation, but not before gifting Caleb a small amulet carved from bone, etched with protective symbols. "Wear it always," Running Deer had said, his eyes locking onto the boys. "The guardians respect balance, but they do not forget." Caleb wore it dutifully, the cool weight against his chest a constant reminder. The town, in the ritual's aftermath, had embraced a newfound harmony. Community gatherings honored both settler and indigenous histories. A small museum wing dedicated to the 1805 events, curated by Esther Klein. Visitors came occasionally, drawn by whispers of the haunted woods, but Black Hollow guarded its secrets closely, the residents bound by an unspoken pact. Yet beneath the surface calm, the eternal watch persisted. Dr. Alan Roth, back at his university, immersed himself in research, cross-referencing Caleb's language with global xenoglossy cases. He uncovered parallels in American monsters accounts, tales of rural awakenings where children channeled voices after disturbing ancient sites, from Appalachian hollows to Pacific Northwest forests. One story from the 1990s mirrored Caleb's. A girl in Oregon speaking Salish after a cave collapse, her words warning of ecological imbalances. Roth corresponded with Hensley, sharing findings that suggested these phenomena were not isolated but part of a larger pattern, perhaps the Earth's way of protesting human encroachments. "The guardians aren't gone," he wrote in one email. "They're dormant, watching through vessels like Caleb when needed." Hensley, reading it late at night, felt a familiar chill, recalling the shadow's hollow eyes. Caleb himself sensed the watch most acutely. In quiet moments, he'd feel a gentle tug in his mind like a forgotten melody surfacing. At school, during a history lesson on colonial America, he raised his hand unprompted. "The land remembers the blood," he said, his voice steady. The teacher paused, chalk in hand, as classmates stared. "What do you mean, Caleb?" He shrugged, the amulet shifting under his shirt. "Just something I heard." Later in therapy, he elaborated to Hensley, "They're not angry anymore, but they whisper reminders about respecting the earth, not digging where we shouldn't." Hensley noted it as post-traumatic insight, but privately wondered if Caleb had become a permanent conduit, attuned to the guardian's subtle vigil. Deputy Tom Carver, patrolling the wood's perimeter, noticed changes too. The animals had returned to normal behaviors, but certain areas remained untouched. Deer avoiding the clearing, birds circling but never landing. He found fresh glyphs on trees occasionally, not carved by human hands but formed by bark patterns, as if the forest itself inscribed warnings. Reporting to the group in informal meetings at the diner, he'd say, "It's like the pines are keeping score." Esther, sipping coffee, would nod, her research expanding to include environmental angles, how logging and development had spiked such events historically. The 1980s clear-cutting woke them first, she theorized. Caleb's accident was the catalyst, but the root is deeper. our disregard for the past. As winter blanketed Black Hollow in snow, the watch manifested in dreams shared across the town. Ellen dreamt of walking the woods, guided by shadowy figures to hidden springs, awakening with a sense of peace. Carver envisioned patrols where ghosts nodded approval, fading into mist. Even strangers passing through reported vivid sleeps, tales of ancient pacts renewed. Roth, visiting for the holidays, experienced one, standing in the 1805 massacre, witnessing the blood spill, then fast-forwarding to the ritual, where Caleb's voice sealed the wound. Waking, he rushed to document it, convinced these were collective memories. The Guardian's way of ensuring history didn't repeat. Caleb, adapting to his role, began journaling the whispers, fragments of language that came in quiet hours, translated with Roth's help into lessons. Honor the soil, for it holds the echoes. He shared them sparingly, with Ellen and Hensley, who saw it as therapeutic. But one entry troubled them, a prophecy of future disturbance. When iron bites the earth again, the cycle stirs. It coincided with news of a proposed development, a highway expansion skirting the woods. The town mobilized quietly, petitions circulating, Esther leading historical preservation arguments. Caleb spoke at a council meeting, his young voice carrying weight. We've learned from the past. Let's not wake what's sleeping. The proposal stalled, whispers crediting an unseen influence. In spring, as buds emerged, the Eternal Watch felt like a guardian angel rather than a specter. Caleb grew taller, his experiences forging a maturity that drew friends and mentors. He explored linguistics with Roth's guidance, decoding old texts with ease, his mind expanded by the ordeal. Hensley published an anonymized case study, framing it as a psychiatric anomaly with cultural overlays, but hinting at deeper mysteries. The human mind, she wrote, may hold doors to collective unconscious realms, opened by trauma or fate. Responses flooded in, similar stories from across the country, suggesting Black Hollow wasn't unique but part of a tapestry of American monsters, hidden forces tied to the land's bloody history. Yet, on solitary walks near the wood's edge, Caleb would pause, listening to the wind's subtle cadence. The Guardian's presence was a comfort now, a silent companionship. Thank you, he'd whisper, touching the amulet. And in the rustle of leaves, he'd hear a faint reply, Pax tibi and vigilamus. Peace to you. We watch. The cycle reckoned and rested, held its breath, the boy forever marked as its sentinel. Years turned into decades in the quiet town of Black Hollow, Pennsylvania, where the events of 1995 faded into local legend, whispered around campfires and in dimly lit bars, but never fully forgotten by those who lived through them. Caleb Winters grew into a man, his childhood brush with the ancient guardians shaping him in ways both profound and subtle. He pursued a career in archaeology, specializing in pre-Columbian sites across North America, driven by an innate understanding of the land's hidden voices. His work uncovered artifacts that echoed the glyphs from whispering pines, spiral stones, obsidian tools, bone amulets, each discovery a reminder that the Guardian's watch extended far beyond one small town. Ellen Winters, aging gracefully, became a storyteller in her own right, sharing anonymized versions of her son's tale at community gatherings, emphasizing themes of respect for history and the environment. She planted a memorial garden near their home, a living tribute to the reconciled spirits where lavender bloomed eternally, warding off unrest with its soothing scent. Dr. Margaret Hensley retired from psychiatry, her career forever altered by Caleb's case. She authored a book, Voices from the Void, Psychiatric Anomalies and Cultural Echoes, blending clinical analysis with folklore, arguing that the human mind serves as a repository for collective traumas, surfacing in times of ecological or historical disturbance. Her reflections delved deep into the fragility of sanity, positing that what we dismiss as delusion might be glimpses into parallel realities or ancestral memories encoded in our DNA. Dr. Alan Roth, the linguist, continued his academic pursuits, founding an institute dedicated to xenoglossy and lost languages. His archives included recordings of Caleb's chants, analyzed alongside similar cases from around the world. Children in India reciting Sanskrit epics, elders in Africa channeling Bantu dialects long extinct. Roth's final paper, published in 2015, theorized a linguistic subconscious, a universal layer where dead tongues linger, awakened by trauma or sacred sites. Deputy Tom Carver rose to sheriff, implementing policies that protected Whispering Pines from development, turning it into a preserved historical park. Esther Klein's Historical Society thrived, her exhibits drawing scholars who marveled at the 1805 connections, weaving a narrative of reconciliation between past and present. But the true depth of this story lies not in the resolutions, but in the enduring questions it raises about the human condition. Caleb's awakening to an ancient language revealed the porous boundaries of the mind, how it can become a conduit for forces beyond comprehension, be they psychological fractures, spiritual entities, or echoes of forgotten atrocities. It underscores the unpredictability of the psyche, a labyrinth where innocence collides with the primordial, forcing us to confront the shadows within ourselves. In a world racing toward modernity, cases like Caleb serve as stark reminders of the debts we owe to the earth and its history. The guardians, whether metaphorical manifestations of guilt or literal protectors of sacred ground, symbolize the consequences of disregard. The logging of the 1980s, the massacre of 1805, all threads in a tapestry of human hubris. Yet, through ritual and atonement, balance was restored, suggesting that redemption is possible but only through acknowledgement and action. This psychiatric enigma challenges our perception of reality, urging us to listen to the whispers before they become roars, to honor the unseen lest it demand restitution in blood and voice. The eternal watch, as Caleb came to call it, persisted in subtle ways. On anniversaries of the ritual, faint chants would echo in the wind, audible only to those attuned, like Caleb, who would pause in his digs, smiling at the affirmation. Black Hollow experienced no more vanishings, no unexplained languages, but a profound sense of guardianship enveloped the town. Residents reported dreams of guidance, farmers finding fertile soil where none existed, children avoiding dangers through intuitive hunches. The woods themselves seemed alive with benevolence, paths clearing for hikers, wildlife thriving in harmony. Caleb married, had children of his own, passing down the amulet with stories framed as cautionary tales. The land speaks, he'd tell them, and we must learn its language. His offspring showed no signs of the gift or curse, but carried a respect for nature that bordered on reverence. Ellen, in her twilight years, found solace in the garden, feeling the guardian's presence as a comforting embrace, an assurance that her son's ordeal had mended a cosmic rift. Reflecting deeper, this case illuminates the interplay between mind, myth, and matter. Psychiatry, with its tools of diagnosis and therapy, grapples with the tangible, chemical imbalances, neural pathways. But what of the intangible? Caleb's fluent recitation of a proto-language defies explanation solely through science, hinting at quantum entanglements or collective unconscious reservoirs where history pools, waiting for a crack to spill through. The 1805 ties evoke cycles of violence in American history, from colonial conquest to modern exploitations, suggesting that unresolved traumas manifest in the living, demanding voice through the vulnerable. The guardians embody indigenous wisdom suppressed, rising to remind settlers descendants of stolen lands and broken pacts. In this light, Caleb's story is a microcosm of national reckoning, a psychiatric lens on cultural amnesia. It compels us to question, how many monsters in American lore are projections of guilt, shadows cast by unacknowledged sins? The fragility of morality is laid bare. Ordinary people like Ellen or Hensley, thrust into extraordinary confrontations, emerging transformed, their worldviews expanded to encompass the inexplicable. As time wore on, similar cases emerged elsewhere, documented in Roth's Institute, a boy in the Appalachians speaking Gaelic after a mine collapse, a girl in the Southwest channeling Navajo prophecies post-earthquake. Each echoed Caleb's pattern, innocence intersecting with disturbed sights, awakening ancient guardians. These American monsters, as the series termed them, weren't beasts of flesh but spectral custodians, enforcing equilibrium in a disequilibrated world. Caleb contributed anonymously to research, his insights bridging personal experience with academic rigor. He advocated for preservation, speaking at conferences. The mind is a mirror to the land. Disturb one and the other shatters. His life became a testament to resilience, turning trauma into purpose. the ancient language a gift that enriched rather than haunted. In the end, the story of the psychiatric boy who woke up speaking an ancient language transcends one child's ordeal, becoming a parable for our era. It warns of the perils in ignoring history's echoes, the vulnerability of the human spirit to forces vast and old. Yet, it offers hope. Through understanding, ritual, and community, we can silence the whispers, restore peace, and coexist with the shadows. The Eternal Watch continues, not as a threat but as a vigilant companion, ensuring that the lessons of 1805, 1995, and beyond are heeded. Caleb Winters, now in his 40s, looks back with gratitude, knowing his voice bridged eras, mending what was broken. And in Black Hollow the pines whisper softly, a lullaby of equilibrium regained. Congratulations, you've journeyed to the end of this chilling tale, braving the depths of the human mind and the shadows of history that few dare to explore. You're part of an elite circle, those courageous souls who confront the inexplicable head-on, emerging wiser and more attuned to the world's hidden rhythms. By sticking with us through every twist, revelation, and whisper, you've proven yourself a true seeker of truth, unafraid of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of everyday life. Now, to solidify your place in this community, drop a comment below with the phrase, "This story awakened the shadows in my own mind." By sharing this, you're signaling to fellow truth seekers that you're committed to unraveling the mysteries that society shuns, helping to forge a network of minds dedicated to exposing the unseen. Your words will resonate, drawing in others who crave the thrill of the enigmatic, building a fortress of curiosity against the mundane. But don't stop there. Sharing this video is crucial. Imagine it as casting a lantern into the abyss, illuminating paths for those lost in ignorance, pulling them toward revelations that could alter their very perception of reality. By spreading the word, you're ensuring that these dark secrets don't remain buried, that more people awaken to the fragility of the mind and the guardians that watch over forgotten wounds. Hit that share button and watch as the ripples extend, drawing in souls hungry for the truth no one else dares to tell. And if this tale has gripped you, ensnared your thoughts like vines from an ancient forest, subscribe now. Becoming a subscriber is like joining a secret society, one that gathers under the cover of night to decipher codes hidden in history's margins, to listen for whispers in the wind that carry warnings from the past. Without your subscription, you risk drifting back into the fog of forgetfulness, missing the next descent into the bizarre and disturbing. But by subscribing, you bind yourself to this unique fellowship, a cadre of explorers who thrive on the sinister, the strange, the profound. Turn on notifications and let each new video be a summons to adventure, a key unlocking doors to the inexplicable. Keep your curiosity alive. Dive into our other videos where more psychiatric enigmas, unsolved horrors, and dark secrets await. Each one is a step deeper into the tunnel, a chance to confront what lies in the shadows of the human soul. Thank you for being here. Your presence fuels this quest. Until next time, listen closely. The Guardians might just be speaking to you.